Hey, this is Jody Roundhouse with the Roundhouse Report. I just got this in the mail. It's Time Magazine. Today is May 4th. And this has to do with Venezuela. I'm trying to position my camera so that it doesn't fall. This has to do with Venezuela. I just got up. I went out to get the mail. And I came across this freaking thing. This is the most absurd story that I've ever read. It's written by Carl Vick. Carl Vick. Time Magazine. Issue May 13th, 2019. That's what we're going to be talking about. Venezuela. Like I said, I just got up. So I'm tired. And I'm confused. Okay? Can't drink coffee. It's not the caffeine. There's something in the coffee bean itself. Gives me a panic attack. But I could drink Red Bull, thank God. Because honestly, you know, when I first wake up, my eyes are sensitive, my feet hurt. I haven't smoked a cigarette. There's lots of, things, but in case, real quick, a recap. There were elections that were held in Venezuela months ago. The incumbent, Maduro, rigged the election. Everyone knows it. And he's saying, I won. Okay, well, there's a young dude named Juan Guaido. Now, he's the actual one who won. And this is according to the international community minus the anti-American axis. Because everyone supports Guaido against Maduro except Russia, China, Cuba, North Korea, obviously, but that's Iran, Syria. If you go to Wikipedia, and Wikipedia Hugo Chavez, and Wikipedia Maduro, and then from there go into a little wormhole on Wikipedia, and look at the government structure of Venezuela, okay? You're going to see a lot of names. Vladimir. You're going to see a lot of Arab names. You're going to see a lot of Persian names. Mohammed, Hussein. You know why? Because Syria and Iran sit on a board, people don't know this, that's based in the Western Hemisphere, and it's an alliance with people like Maduro. It's called, I believe, the Bolivarian Movement. Not to be confused with something else that's termed similarly. The Bolivarian Movement is a anti-American, socialist, economic. It has an innocuous name, but it's a military anti-American axis. Russia's on the game, obviously. They haven't been in the Western Hemisphere since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, they've had subs during the Cold War that patrolled our coasts, just as we did to them. But the Cuban Missile Crisis, how many years ago is that? It's 2019. By the way, today's May 4th, noon. Just got up. All right. So, and by we I mean the United States, from the article, because Carl Vick does have a couple good things in here, some 50 nations recognize Guaido's claim to the presidency, and support also came in tweets from the governments of Brazil, Colombia, Paraguay, and others. Brazil's new leader, Bolsonaro, I think his name is, he loves Trump. He's very Trumponian himself. In fact, the time period here from 2016 onward, we're going to see what happens in 2020, can be known as the era of the Trumponian era, is what I've dubbed it. I forgot to do this at the beginning. The Roundhouse Report, please subscribe to my YouTube and just YouTube Jody Roundhouse and just hit that little bell button. That way you get all my updates on Venezuela. So the Bolivarian Alliance is backed by Syria and Iran. And who backs Syria and Iran? Russia. Okay? Seriously, look at the government structure. Look at the interior ministers, the foreign ministers of Maduro's government. Vladimir blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 Hussein. I'm telling you, they're riddled, and this has been going on for more than 2 decades. Hugo Chavez helped initiate this in 2000, the year 2000. Iran has a military group. It's called Hezbollah. It's based in Lebanon, and they fight wars with Israel. Not to be confused with Hamas and the Gaza Strip. They suck. Hezbollah is an actual viable military force, and Iran created them, armed them, equipped them, trains them, and commands them on the field of battle. They killed over 250 Marines in the early 1980s. That was their introduction onto the world stage in southern Lebanon. We had Marines in Beirut. They came in and they car bombed it. Hezbollah did. This is when they were first getting started. We haven't lost that many Marines in one day since the Battle of Hue and during the Vietnam War. Okay? That was a big hit. We lost some cruise missiles, but we didn't do much more than that. But now, 20 years later, Venezuela is a verifiable standing army. They've been fighting inside of Syria for years now, alongside Iranian troops and militias drawn from Iraq. That's a whole other video. Hezbollah, about 10 years ago, if not, right around when Chavez came to power, about 20 years ago, Venezuela they opened up their own Hezbollah, and guess where it's based? It's based in freaking Venezuela. Now, the Iranians are Persian. Persians and Arabs, for that matter, they can pass as Spanish, Ecuadorian, Bolivian, Mexican, whatever. And these caravans that are coming up, which I'm sure are being orchestrated and paid for by the Democratic National Committee, I'm not saying that out of political bias, it just makes sense for them to do that. Giving them water as they go and food, just basic stuff. So Venezuela has Iran in there, pretty heavy with Hezbollah. Maduro, the falsely re-elected president, he's staying in power. He's saying, I'm not going anywhere. And a quote from him, this is Hamilton, Brazil's vice president. Okay, so this is coming from Brazil's vice president. Bolsonaro is the new leader of Brazil. He has invited the United States to open up a major military installation inside of Brazil, which would be great to shore up the Western Hemisphere, because what we're talking about is the Monroe Doctrine. And this is not really being reported on in the news. Sometimes John Bolton reports on it. But generally speaking, especially with America's public school system being in such shambles, most people don't know what the Monroe Doctrine is. The Monroe Doctrine was established, I believe, in the 1800s at some point. Probably had something to do with some guy named Monroe. Probably Google that, right? I don't know. It basically said the Western Hemisphere is ours. This was when the United States in the 1800s had come into its own. It had a standing army. It had a little bit of a navy. And it said, listen, because the Europeans were still colonizing in the 1800s, it said Central America, South America. We said, listen, you guys stay out of the Western Hemisphere. If you come into the Western Hemisphere, we will immediately attack you. We will consider you landing troops in South America. This would be in the 1800s to the British, for instance. We will consider that as an invasion of America. We will come and fight you. We don't care what happens. We will come and attack you. It's deterrence. And that deterred successfully up until the Cuban Missile Crisis, which we won. The Americans stared down the Russians, all that. You know, the quote. They blinked and they turned back around. Until then, since 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, Russia has not been in the Western Hemisphere in such a blatant way. Juan Guaido is being backed by a guy named Leopoldo Lopez. And Lopez was a political prisoner, from my understanding, under Maduro. Who, by the way, Maduro remains, this is from the article, Maduro remains deeply unpopular. And by the way, I kind of take back what I said at the beginning. This guy does have some good points that he makes, but he's also absurd. And I'll get to that. Maduro remains deeply unpopular, tied as he is to the near total collapse of the economy in Venezuela under socialist rule, which has driven 3.7 million Venezuelans to leave the oil-rich country. That exodus into the neighboring nations has galvanized the region to overthrow Maduro, but non-violently. Yet despite U.S. economic sanctions, Maduro still has funds to buy the loyalty of senior military officers. Guaido isn't the only one with international backers. Maduro has the support of Cuba, China, and most of all, Russia, drawn by both oil and ambitions. And ordinary Venezuelans, I didn't know about this, ordinary Venezuelans feared the plainclothes thugs loyal to Maduro, known as colectivos, notorious for firing into crowds and targeting protesters. Okay, one thing here. Maduro has the support of Cuba, China, and, most of all, Russia. Leaves out Iran, who has troops, commanders, and they riddle the government of Maduro. It leaves out Iran and Venezuela and Hezbollah, and it leaves out Syria. How can you write an op-ed for Time magazine, expect to be taken seriously, and leave those two countries out when you make such a claim? It should read, Maduro has the support of Cuba, China, Russia, Iran, Syria, Bolivia, etc. Most of all, Russia. That's how it should read. Back to the article. The Trump administration is preoccupied by the involvement of Moscow and Havana in Maduro's survival. In a tweet on April 30th, President Donald Trump threatened, quote, full and complete embargo, end quote, on Cuba if it did not withdraw troops he said were assisting Maduro. All right, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo earlier claimed that the Kremlin had stepped in to persuade Maduro not to flee. According to Pompeo, quote, he had an airplane on the tarmac. Maduro had an airplane on the tarmac. He was ready to leave this morning, as we understand it, he said in an interview, and the Russians indicated he should stay. That makes perfect sense. Reverse it. Reverse it. Let's pretend like it's in right next to Russia. Wouldn't you want us to stay? Wouldn't you want the anti-American government to stay right next to your house or right next to your home? I'm rambling. But anyway, it's all about geostrategic balance of power politics. If the Russians, the Chinese have a foothold in the Western Hemisphere, that makes us more vulnerable. Therefore, again, I give props to Bolsonaro and Brazil, because if we can put down a nice military facility and we can encircle those island chains from Florida and the Caribbean all the way down, we can literally envelop everything with a naval blockade. Reminiscent of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Uh-oh. And the Cubans do have troops there. Venezuelans. Cuba has put a lot of money into their doctors over the decades. Doctors. They have really, really renowned physicians in Cuba. So they've sent, and this has been going on for decades. In exchange for oil, Cuba has been sending doctors to Venezuela for over 10 years. And now they have troops there. Jeff Ramsey, an analyst at the Washington office on Latin America. This is the guy I have an issue with. Ramsey says the White House has involved itself in Venezuela mainly to embrace electoral prospects among far-right expatriates of the region in Florida. Bullshit. That might be one reason. But the Trump administration is not involved mainly to enhance electoral prospects. The Trump administration is in Venezuela because of geostrategic basic balance of power politics. This guy, this Ramsey guy, Jeff Ramsey, who is a freaking analyst at the Washington office, surely I don't know more than he does. So he has an agenda. Time magazine tends to be liberal. Is he writing for his agenda or is he not? That's my pitbull Missy. Can you hear her? Yeah, that's why she's in the other room. That's why the door's shut. Okay, the real reason that we want, by the way, the United States already has troops in Colombia. Just as the Russians have, we also have been sending heavy lift military cargo planes that are giant. We've been offloading aid. I don't know how many tanks and armored personnel carriers and machine guns and bullet chains and crates of ammunition and AR-15, the modify the M4 carbine. I don't know how many we're sending in our humanitarian aid, but we already have troops in Colombia sitting right on the border with Venezuela. Don't really hear much about that. Bolsonaro in Brazil and the Colombian government both want to invade Venezuela because those 3 million plus people who have left that I just mentioned, guess where they're going? They're going toward freaking Brazil, and they're going directly into Colombia, and they're heading north into the caravans. That's great. A lot of military-age men coming in saying that their wives battered them so that they can get asylum in the United States because they were fearful of their battering wives. These stories that they make up as they hit the border with the United States. Ramsey says the White House has involved itself in Venezuela mainly to enhance electoral prospects. Yeah, like I said, the DNC, they want those votes, etc. He's not taking into account the national security issue. Does he want Russia and China first opened its first military base, its first foreign military base on the Suez Canal in a little tiny country inside of Africa. That's their first expansion outside of their traditional sphere of influence, China and the South China Sea. Then you can look at my other videos for that. But back to the article. Oh, also keep in mind, not only militarily do we have a presence down there regarding the Panama Canal, which we keep on lock for obvious reasons. We also have an intricate, decades-long system of intelligence officers throughout South America, Central America, and Mexico because of the war on drugs. These guys have deeply embedded connections, not only among the cartels, but also among the governments, because frequently the governments and the cartels are one and the same in this area of the world. But the White House, the article, but the White House threat has, quote, the White House threat that, quote, all options are on the table, end quote, has not reached the Pentagon, which has said it has no plans to intervene. Bullshit. Every single region of the world, the Pentagon is charged with drawing up emergency contingency plans. That includes Europe, Africa, South America, the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, the Hawaii, East Asia, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, South Asia, Russia, Middle East. I mean, we had, AFCOM, African Command, CENTCOM, Central Command. Just keep, going down the list, okay? So, we have contingency plans that were drawn up when Hugo Chavez first took power 20 years ago. So to say that the Pentagon doesn't have contingency plans when we're looking at a freaking potential, what we're seeing right now in Syria in the Civil War, where Russia's there with its proxies and the United States is there with our proxies, we see that potentially happening in our backyard, which is why I'm dating this. Again, it's May 4th, because in 10 minutes things could change, because Juan Guaido called for a coup couple of days ago, and it didn't really go off too well. But like I said, Brazil's vice president, this is Bolsonaro's guy, he said, quote, Guaido and Leopoldo Lopez, are in a situation where there is no turning back, end quote. That's Brazil's vice president. No turning back. And he's right. This is a zero-sum game at this point. Either Maduro stays in power, and Russia wins and China wins. Russia has publicly declared 400 troops inside of Venezuela. They're doing war games with the Venezuelan military. China has publicly declared 100 to 300 troops inside of Venezuela. Why? Iran has had troops and indigenous troops that it has raised to form the Bolivarian militia / Hezbollah, whatever you want to call it. Oh, regarding which, Maduro wants to increase its numbers by 1 million. So he's currently doing a draft, a forced conscript. That's the latest source material I read, where he's going to increase the ranks of that militia by 1 million men. So all options are on the table. This Ramsey guy. But the White House threat that all options are on the table has not reached the Pentagon, which has said it has no plans to intervene. I don't know if Ramsey said that or if Carl Vick said it, but that's absurd. We are sending troops. Congress publicly has said, we already have troops in Colombia. We want to send another 5,000 troops to Colombia to sit on Venezuela's border. Publicly. Watch C-SPAN. Watch freaking Fox News. This dude needs to get with the picture, okay? My goodness. What am I? Am I better than this guy? No. Carl Vick's writing for Time. I'm sitting in my freaking bedroom, smoking a cigarette, and a freaking wife beater, the Red Bull, which I forgot about. I have calcium deposits all over my hands and feet. How do I know more about this shit than he does? Agenda. He has an agenda. Quote, this is Phil Gunson. It's the best part. Quote, in some ways it's good, obviously, because the U.S. is no longer the great regional hegemon that determines everything that happens, end quote, says Phil Gunson, a Latin America analyst with the International Crisis Group. Maybe I should apply for an internship. Quote, the sense that this is more multipolar now is not by any means a bad thing, but there doesn't seem to be an easy way to resolve these things anymore. Phil Gunson, I recommend that you submit your resignation letter to the International Crisis Group now because you're getting officially called out. In some ways, it's good. In some ways, it's good for the Monroe Doctrine to not be enacted, which, by the way, National Security Advisor John Bolton under Trump has used that as a justification on the mainstream cable media television. He says, this is the Monroe Doctrine. This goes back hundreds of years. This guy's saying it's a good thing to have Russian troops inside of Venezuela. It's a good thing to have Iran so deeply embedded in Venezuela. It's a good thing to have Russian troops, Chinese troops, Iranian troops, Hezbollah. It's a good thing for them all to be there. Because so many of them can pass as Spanish. And if you get 10, and the Iranians are only sending the best of their best. They're not sending grunts. They're sending the Quds Force, which would be like they're sending troops that would be on par with America's Navy SEALs. So imagine 10 of those guys infiltrating the border, and they've already caught guys affiliated with ISIS from Syria, military-aged men, at the Canadian and the Mexican borders. You don't hear too much about that, right? Do Google search, because we're also finding Afghans. A lot of people from Africa are taking advantage of this opportunity, and they're finding their way to South America, and they're getting their way up through the freaking, in these caravans, they're intermingling. A lot of military-age men trying to get up in here. So, Phil Gunson says, in some ways it's good, obviously, because the U.S. is no longer the great regional hegemon that determines everything that happens. End quote. What the fuck? Dude? Gunson? What kind of a last name is that? Because I'm wondering where your loyalties lie. What is wrong with you? Of course we want the Western Hemisphere. That's our entire southern flank, United States. Our western flank is covered by the Pacific Ocean. Our punch-out is Hawaii. We're good. Eastern Asia, we're good. Our left flank, if you look at a map of the United States, our left flank is good. Our right flank is secured by the Atlantic Ocean with an island chain controlled by the United Kingdom stretching across the mid-Atlantic. East of that, we have allies in Africa that we've been working with to counter al-Shabaab and other extremists in Mali alongside the French. And we have Europe. Our eastern flank is secure. Our northern flank, Canada and the Arctic, secure. Southern flank, this guy wants it wide open. He wants, apparently, I'm implying, the implication I'm getting from this is, he wants a major Russian military facility in Venezuela, at least one. Probably a couple in Cuba. Maybe one in Bolivia, because that guy hates us. He wants the Chinese to have troops there. I don't know why. The Chinese want to make their own Panama Canal. They've actually signed the paperwork for that, but analysts and they speculate this is more of a symbolic thing. They're not actually going to do it because we won't let them. Panama Canal Zone is very important. If you shut down the Panama Canal, which if you look at a map, Panama and Venezuela, that's kind of dangerous. See, this is way more complex than the media is leading on to. So if you shut down the Panama Canal, the only way to get from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean to transport either trading or military vessels is to go around the freaking bottom part of South America. You will die if you do that. You will die. It's violent. What I heard from my sailor friend, who's technically an international trafficker of, ironically, Georgians from southern Russia, who want, they're old people, they want to come up in the United States, so he's a human trafficker. I can't mention his name, but he's known as Shipwreck. What you do is, if you're in a situation where you're tied onto your sailboat, and you get into some rough waves, and you fall off that crap, and your rope comes off, take a deep breath, dive down, straight down to the bottom of the ocean. You can go hundreds and hundreds of feet, and then hundreds and hundreds and more, but by then it won't matter. Because if you're on a sailboat, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the ocean, and you fall in, and you don't have that rope around your hands so that you can freaking swim back to your boat, and your boat keeps going, you dive deep. You dive deep, and then you start breathing water. Yeah. You start breathing water. That's what he told me. He's like, look, I know people who've had to do this. Unfortunately, a friend of his, another friend of his is serving prison time, 15 years. Interpol. So, anyhow, you just breathe water until you die because you literally have no other option. So, the Panama Canal is pretty important. Okay, this is the Roundhouse Report. Please subscribe. Time Magazine, they usually have at least one good foreign policy piece per magazine. That's why I get it. This is a foreign policy piece that brings up some good points. For instance, from 1900 to 2006, power in the Central American and South American region. From the article, in a striking number of cases, at least, let's see here, from 1900 and 2006, power changed hands in the region 162 times via military coup. Huh. Yeah, I know, we've been all up in there. United States. Monroe Doctrine. Okay. Typically, these military coups, back to the article, typically announced from the studio of a state broadcaster. In a striking number of cases, at least 41 by the count of a Harvard study. What's Harvard? It's like Phoenix, the Arizona Phoenix University or whatever. I'm not going to go to Harvard. Cheap degree. The force behind the coup was the U.S., which maintained a proprietary hold over the hemisphere it regarded as its realm. Of course. And we should allow Putin to do the same thing so we can balance things out a bit and things won't be so bad. Look at it from his point of view. We're pushing up on his borders. How would we feel if a virulently anti-American government backed by Russia was suddenly overthrew the Mexican government, took control, and then the Russians started landing troops inside of Mexico? We would be like, dude, what the fuck? And we would probably invade and it'd be bad. Okay? Look at it from Putin's point of view. You know what I mean? We're pushing NATO further and further east. It's bad news. But anyway, it's Venezuela. The latest update is it just got up. So it's the latest update. Please subscribe for more. Yeah. Hit me up on Minds. Minds.com/Jody Roundhouse. Jody with a Y. One word. Yeah, recently, I have to plug them now, apparently. I drink these things anyways. Roundhouse Report, signing out. Speaking of Cuba, I have a really nice, my buddy Shipwreck that I just told you about. He gave me a really nice batch of Cuban cigarettes, and that's my last one. Cuban tobacco cigarettes. I'm going to mix them up in a little blend. Spliff? Alright. Roundhouse Report, please subscribe. Hope you learned something. I don't know, I may have rambled this whole time. But at this point, nobody's watching. So it doesn't matter. Ah!